So, deontological ethics, otherwise known as Kantian ethics. This is going to be our second normative ethical theories, which we're going to look at in A Level Philosophy. So, deontological ethics is a duty-based ethical theory. It comes from Kant's critique of pure reason. So, for Kant, he was a moral realist who thought that morals were these fundamental laws, and we have a duty to follow these moral laws. So when we do something that has some moral bearing, in essence, what's going on here is we're acting out of duty. So it's not a consequentialist theory. It doesn't look at necessarily the consequences like utilitarianism does. Ultimately, for Kantian ethics, Kant thought that it doesn't really matter about the consequences. What matters is about following the moral law. So it's sort of absolutist in that way. And deontology comes from the Greek deon, meaning duty. So what is ultimately the idea of goodness in Kantian ethics? Goodness is about following moral law. And moral law has a basis of rationale behind it. So its moral laws are developed from a process of reason. So when we're looking at what it means to be moral or to do moral acts, in essence, what this means is acting out of duty rather than in accordance with duty. So what this means is, let's say there's a drowning man, all right? So there's a drowning man, and you have to make a decision on whether to go and save that man. So for Kant, to act moral is to have the intention of acting out of duty to save the man. It's not about a reward, it's not about consequences, it's not about just the outcome, it's not acting in accordance with duty, it's not acting in line with doing what's right for, say, the sake of status or reward or something like that, but rather acting out of knowing that it's the right thing to do, because that is ultimately the moral law. So in terms of how this is formulated, Kant makes a distinction between a categorical imperative and a hypothetical imperative. Categorical imperatives are rules that apply to everyone, so they're universal rules and they are unconditional. So it doesn't matter about what your expectations are or what your values are or what you want. Ultimately, this is something that everyone has to follow at all times. For example, don't lie. It doesn't matter about a situation, it doesn't matter about what outcome you want, whether you should be lying or not. It's ultimately the case that in any situation you shouldn't lie. So compare that with hypothetical imperatives, which are conditional. So hypothetical imperative takes on the form of if then, so it's a conditional statement. So these are about your desires or goals, which Kant doesn't think is ultimately what morality is about. So if we consider utilitarianism in this, utilitarianism seems to look at morality on this hypothetical basis. It's if you want to achieve happiness or if we want some desired outcome, then we ought to act in such a way. And for utilitarians, they believe that the outcome that we ought to desire or that we do desire is happiness. Therefore, we ought to act in line with those things that are going to bring about the most happiness. But for Kant, it doesn't really matter about that. It doesn't matter about your desires for happiness. Ultimately, moral law is moral law, whether you like it or not. So how does Kant formulate categorical imperatives? Bear in mind, Kant believes that moral laws come from a base of reason. They're sort of on the same level as the laws of logic and the laws of physics. They are rational principles. And to not follow those principles is an irrational thing to do. So he has two formulas for what passes as a categorical imperative, what can be made as a moral law. The first one is that it has to be universalizable. It's universalizability principle. So Kant says, act only in accordance to that maxim whereby you can at the same time will that it should become a universal law. So what that means is any categorical imperatives, because it's got to apply universally to everyone, it has to be able to be applied without contradiction. Okay? So if you apply universal law and it ultimately brings about a contradiction, then it can't be a categorical imperative. And the second of his formulas is called the humanity principle. Now this states, in terms of moral laws, that one should act in such a way that you treat humanity, whether in your own person or in the person of another, always at the same time as an end, never merely as a means. So in essence, what's going on here is Kant thinks that categorical imperatives can't use anyone, that you can't be acting in a moral way which treats any humans as a means to a different end or to your own ends. So those are two important formulas when we're looking at what can pass or what can be considered a categorical imperative or a moral law. So that's sort of a snapshot of what Kantian ethics is, or how Kantian ethics is formed. There are a few issues. One of those issues is clashing duties. So let's say we have a couple of moral laws. We've got one moral law which is never to lie, or to be honest, and the other one is, say, to preserve life where possible, or protect people from harm, or protect lives, not allow harm to be caused. So we could think about a scenario, which is a quite common scenario used, is let's say there is a murderous axeman at the door. And the murderous axeman is asking where, say, your mother is in your house. And you know that the axeman will surely go and kill your mother unless you lied. Of course you know where your mother is, but to protect your mother's life you need to lie. Now here's a situation in which we have two clashing duties. One of them to protect lives, or not allow lives to be harmed or taken away, and the other to be honest. But by being honest, we know that that will cause harm to someone, but by lying, no harm will be caused. So this is a difficulty for Kant's moral laws, because how do we shore up these clashing duties in the sense of which ones should take priority? And surely if there's a case of prioritisation, there could be a problem for Kant's categorical imperatives, i.e. universalising the principle. So considering how we might reply to this clashing duties problem, if we look at the world of human rights, they are a set of laws quite similar to what Kant would consider moral laws. In human rights law, what we can see is that there is a case of prioritisation. We do consider some laws to have priority over others, or some human rights to have priorities over others. So there's always conditions as to when a right applies and when it doesn't. And you could argue in some ways that could be achieved for categorical imperatives or Kant's moral laws. So in essence, what it's saying here is, although we have these moral laws, it doesn't necessarily mean that there couldn't be a case of prioritisation within this. Although some would argue that ultimately that renders Kant's main ethical theory, or his principles around what a categorical imperative is, meaningless or not really workable. So issue number 2 is we might also pass a few laws which pass the two formulas, passes the universalizability formula, and it passes the humanity formula. But we would consider them non-moral. So we have these non-moral universal laws. It's kind of seen as arbitrary. An example of this could be something like, always tie your left shoe before your right shoe. It's universal. It can be applied universally without contradiction. And it also passes the humanity principle. It doesn't treat humans as a means to an end, but rather just as an end in themselves, because it's them doing it. There's no one else to be affected here. But that seems odd, because how do we then differentiate between a non-moral law and a moral law, just through using Kant's categorical imperative formulas? It seems a difficult thing to do. It could be argued back, so there could be a way to reply, which is to to say, well, it's just a case of common sense. We all seem to know intuitively what's a moral matter from an arbitrary matter or from another matter. It's quite clear that tying your left shoe before your right shoe isn't a moral matter, and everyone would commonly know that. Although you could probably say that to bring common sense into Kant's quite methodical, sophisticated basis for what a moral law is, using all these different formulas of rationale, such as the first formula and the second formula. From pure reason, it doesn't seem like he considers what common sense is. So if we're just basing our understanding of moral laws from non-moral laws on common sense, then this rigor that Kant has doesn't seem to be established. If you're just going to say, well, use your common sense, we're leaving quite a lot of vagary there. There's quite a lot open to interpretation, which I don't think Kant would want. Issue number 3 is the value of consequences. So generally, we tend to consider the consequences of what we do. This is a worldly affair. We're always looking at the consequences of actions, and we do value those consequences. So in Kant's ethical theory, because it discounts consequences altogether, it seems as though he's taken away from that value that we all have of the outcome. And to take away the value of the outcome would seem like an odd move when it comes to morality, because morality seems to be it seems to be focused on what is the best outcome for us all. That is surely what morality is all about, having the best for everyone. So a reply to this could be to say that moral laws are sort of consequentialist. The reason why Kant has provided this analysis or this theory on moral laws is because by having these moral laws, there should be generally good outcomes, because the intention is that we act out of duty, and by acting out of duty, there should be, in essence, good outcomes. But if it's the case that moral laws aim at producing good outcomes, then it seems like we're weaving ourselves into a utilitarianism, into consequentialism. So, in essence, when Kant isn't concerned about the outcomes, is just concerned about following moral law, it seems as though moral laws are concerned about the outcomes. So there could be some difficulty there in shoring up what the moral law is actually trying to do. And if it's trying to create good outcomes, then surely good outcomes should be the foundations of morality. Issue number 4, value of love in morality. It seems as though Kant hasn't considered this very human thing, which we call love. And love seems to be the basis of what it means to be good. We tend to be good because we have some sort of love to give, or we're good because we love the things that we treat well. And love seems to be irreplaceable here. We can't really take away love from morality. If we didn't have love for humanity, if we didn't have love for the people that we're surrounded by, then we wouldn't maybe consider morality. Some people would argue that love is the basis of morality. Think about situation ethics, James Fletcher. Love being this basis for what is a moral good. But then again, it could be argued that love could be integrated into Kant's second formula. Okay, remembering that Kant's second formula is the humanity principle. Treat humans as an end in themselves, never as a means to an end. Could that be considered that just means treating all humans with love? Treating humans with love is treating humans as an end in themselves, with their own dignity, their own respect, rather than treating them as a means to an end, which is maybe not treating them in a loving way. And then the final issue for A-level philosophy, for our purposes on deontological ethics, is Philippa Foot's problem. So Philippa Foot posed a problem, or argued that ethics isn't really a case of categorical imperatives like Kant would argue, but rather hypothetical imperatives. Philippa Foot thought that it's not really irrational to not follow one of Kant's moral laws if by following that moral law there would be some sort of bad outcome. In essence, what Foot's saying is to be rational is usually to look at some hypothetical imperative, and it's completely rational, it's totally rational to have a desired goal and to, by wanting to achieve that desired goal, follow the right action in order to bring about that desired goal. And that's Foot's main claim about Kantian ethics is they do seem like conditions. They do seem to have conditions attached to them for everyone. And they're certainly not the same sorts of things as the laws of logic or the laws of physics. They don't have that same kind of status. Moral laws do seem to have a status of personal desire, or at least a value in the outcome, or a desire to have a good outcome. They are very human-centric things. So how might Kant reply to Philippa Foot's objection? Well, there is perhaps one case here whereby Kant's categorical imperatives state that laws should be universalizable. And by universalizing the law, it means that everyone can act in this way without contradiction. So if there is just a bunch of hypothetical imperatives and it's about everyone's desire, then it could be that with everyone working by their own hypothetical imperatives, that there comes about contradiction in a way that means that not everyone can act in such a way. So to act against a categorical imperative, to act in a way whereby the law cannot be universalized, could be considered hypocritical, because not everyone can act in such a way. In which case, if it is hypocritical, if it does cause this contradiction that not everyone can act in such a way, could be considered irrational. In which case, maybe moral laws do have to be categorical imperatives. Maybe they do have to be universalized without contradiction, in which case there wouldn't necessarily be a case of hypothetical imperatives. And that is the snapshot of deontological ethics.